Hey everybody, this is Michelle. I'm back. I asked if I could tell the story of Perseus because I referenced Perseus in one or two of the earlier videos. So I'm back to tell you the story of Perseus. Perseus was a Greek hero that had many adventures, and his life was very interesting. His story begins in Argos. Argos was a kingdom, and the king of Argos' name was Acrisis. Sounds like the word a crisis. A crisis. And Acrisis had one daughter, Danae. She was very beautiful. And he had no sons. And Acrisis was, maybe it was Acrisis was concerned that he had no sons. So he went to the oracle at Delphi and asked what was going on, what would happen, what should he do? And the oracle responded that if Danae ever had a son, that son would kill King Acrisis. So, King Acrisis didn't want to let Danae ever have a son or ever get married at all. So he imprisoned Danae in a tower with a window looking out at the sky. And she never had any people come visit her, especially men. So King Acrisis thought that he was safe. But Zeus, king of the gods, came in through Danae's window in a shower of golden light in through the window and came and visited her there, and she became pregnant. And her son, she had a son, she named him Perseus. Now, King Acrisis was pretty upset because he was afraid of the fate, afraid of the destiny that the oracle at Delphi had foretold. So, but he also did not want to upset Zeus by killing the child, killing Zeus's child. So he took Danae and Perseus, baby Perseus, and put them inside of a wooden box while they were alive, and put that box out into the ocean and left it there to float away. And so Danae and Perseus floated away on the ocean. And Zeus was watching them and helped the box to float safely to another land. And it floated up onto the shore of the island Seriphos, or the land Seriphos. And there it was found by a fisherman named Dictys. And Dictys opened up the box and found Danae and the baby and took care of them, gave them food, and he ended up marrying Danae and raising Perseus as his own child. Now, in Seriphos, Dictys' brother was king, King Polydectes. And King Polydectes was jealous and liked to have all the power for himself. So he had made sure that his brother, Dictys, was poor, and he was a fisherman. But Polydectes was the king and lived in a mansion and had servants. Now, Polydectes saw that Danae, Dictys' wife, was very beautiful, and he wanted to take Danae for himself. But Perseus was growing up into a very strong young man, likely to become a very great hero. And so Polydectes was afraid. He was a coward. He was afraid of Perseus. So he wanted to get rid of Perseus first. So one day, while Perseus was around, King Polydectes decided to throw a party and every guest would have to bring a present for King Polydectes. Now, Perseus was invited to the party, but Perseus was too poor to afford a present. So he went to King Polydectes and asked, "What can I do? I don't have a present for you, but I could go get you something. What would you like?" And King Polydectes used that time to send Perseus on a very dangerous quest, hoping that Perseus would be killed. King Polydectes asked Perseus to bring him the head, or maybe it wasn't the head. He asked him to kill Medusa, regardless. He asked him to kill Medusa. Now, Medusa was once a beautiful woman, but she had desecrated the temple of Athena by sleeping with Poseidon in the temple of Athena. And Athena was so offended that she cursed Medusa, turning her very ugly and giving her snakes for hair, and making her so ugly that even if anyone even looked at her face, they would turn to stone. Now, Medusa had many sisters, but two of them joined Medusa, and the three of them, they could fly, and they were very ugly, and they lived out in the middle of nowhere, and whenever people would come to them, they would attack them and turn them into stone and rob them. And those three together were called the Gorgons, the Gorgon sisters. Now, Medusa had three other sisters who they never died, but they were always old. They were hags, old hags. And they, between the three of them, shared one eye and one tooth. They had to share it, pass it around between the three of them. And those three sisters were called the Graea, something like that. Spelled Greaea, I think. Graeae. Gray. We'll call them gray. I think it actually means gray, like the color gray. Gray women. The gray women. So, the Gray sisters and the Gorgon sisters, all related to each other. Perseus had to kill Medusa, the one of the Gorgon sisters. But no one knew where the Gorgon sisters lived. So, in order to find out where they lived, he had to ask the Gray sisters. And Athena and Hermes came, first of all, Athena and Hermes came to Perseus when they heard he was going to take on this quest. And they gave him some gifts, and they gave him some advice. So the gifts they gave him: Athena gave Perseus a shiny shield, which was so shiny it was like a mirror. And Perseus could look in the mirror, instead of looking at Medusa and turning into stone, he could look in the mirror and see the reflection, and fight her without looking at Medusa. Hermes gave Perseus some sandals with wings on them, so that Perseus could fly, just like Medusa could fly, and the Gorgon sisters could fly. So, but they still didn't know where the Gorgon sisters were. So so Hermes and Athena recommended that Perseus first go visit the Gray sisters and force them to tell him where the Gorgon sisters lived. So he went and he found the Gray sisters, and he saw them sitting around their fireplace with their eye and their tooth, bickering with each other and passing it around so that they could take turns eating their gruel with their one tooth. And Perseus snuck up on them and quickly jumped in and grabbed the eye and the tooth, took it away from them. And they, the sisters were so upset and mad, but they couldn't catch Perseus or do anything to him because they couldn't see. So he told them he would only give them back the eye and the tooth if they told him where the Gorgon sisters were. He also asked them where the Hesperides lived, because the Hesperides could give him some other gifts that would be helpful in fighting Medusa. So the Grey sisters told him where the Hesperides are and where the Gorgon sisters lived. And then Perseus gave back their eye and their tooth, and he flew away. Now, he went to the Hesperides first to get some more things that would help him fight Medusa. The Hesperides, you may remember from the labors of Hercules, were some daughters of the Titan Atlas. And they lived in a garden, and they had some golden apples there. No one knew where they lived, except Atlas, and apparently the Grey sisters, maybe some other mythical people. But most people didn't know where the secret garden of the Hesperides were. So Perseus flew off there and found the Hesperides, and they gave him a cloak of invisibility, and they gave him a helmet of darkness or something like that. They gave him some gifts that would help, and then he flew off to find Medusa. Now he found Medusa and the Gorgon sisters, and he found them, and they were sleeping, I think, luckily. So he jumped in there, and he started to fight them, and he fought all three of them, flying backwards, looking in the shield of Athena, he did manage to defeat them. Now, I think two of the two sisters that weren't Medusa were immortal, like you couldn't kill them. So he had to just keep defending himself until he could capture or corner Medusa with her snake hair, and he cut off her head. And then he put the head with the snake hair into a bag, so that no one would accidentally look at it and turn into stone. And if you remember from the first class, who came out of Medusa's neck?
Pegasus.
Pegasus! That's right! And who is Pegasus?
The winged horse.
He's a winged horse. That's right. He wasn't in our bestiary book. Do you remember what the P beast was? For the letter P that wasn't Pegasus? It was the phoenix. Phoenix. Spelled with a PH. Anyway, so Pegasus, the winged horse, came out of Medusa's neck. Also, Chrysaor came out of Medusa's neck. You may remember Chrysaor from the labors of Hercules. Chrysaor was the father of many of the monsters that Hercules fought. Anyway, so those two beasts come out of Medusa's neck, and Perseus grabs the head, puts it in the bag, and flies away before the other sisters can catch him. So, he's on his way back to Argos. No, not to Argos. On his way back to King Polydectes when he is passing some cliffs, and he sees, chained to the cliff, a gorgeous woman with no clothes, just all this hair, like going crazy places, long hair, and she's gorgeous, and she's crying, and she's chained up to this cliff. And so he flies up to her, and he's like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" And she tells a very sad story. Her name is Andromeda, and she is the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia was very beautiful, and she was also very vain. And she bragged that she was more beautiful than some of the daughters of Poseidon. And Poseidon was offended and sent a sea monster to terrorize the fishing villages along the coast, And he also, I believe, sent a drought and a famine or something. It wouldn't bring any rain. That's what it was, because he's in control of the water. So there was no rain in that land. The name of the kingdom was Ethiopia. I don't think it was actually in the country of Ethiopia, but that was the name of the kingdom. And so the king and the queen sent a messenger to the oracle at Delphi and asked the oracle what they should do. And the oracle said that the only way Poseidon would be appeased would be if they offered their daughter, Princess Andromeda, to be eaten by the sea monster. So that's what the king and the queen were doing. That's why Andromeda was there, chained up to the cliff. So Perseus was very moved by the story, and he decided to rescue Andromeda. He stood there and he waited for the sea monster to come. And then, as the sea monster was coming out of the water, he takes the bag with Medusa's head in it, and he pulls out Medusa's head, and the sea monster turns to stone right there in the water. Then Perseus cuts free Andromeda, flies with her back to her father and mother, and they're very happy, and he marries Andromeda, even though she was engaged to someone else. But Perseus was the bigger hero, so he married Andromeda. Then it's time for him to go back to King Polydectes. And in the meantime, King Polydectes thinks that Perseus is dead. So he is trying to take Danae for himself. And Danae is hiding in a temple. I think it was the temple of Athena, but I'm not sure. But anyway, she's hiding in a temple so that Polydectes can't drag her away. And Perseus gets back, and Polydectes is in his palace, feasting, eating, and drinking, and with all of his guests and his wicked counselors. And Perseus walks in, and Polydectes' mouth just hits the floor, just drops, like, oh, because he's so shocked to see Perseus back alive. Perseus walks in, and he tells Polydectes that he knows what Polydectes did, that he tried to have him killed, that he tried to take Danae, that he sent his brother Dictys away to live in poverty, and that Polydectes deserves what's coming to him. And so Perseus holds up Medusa's head again, and everyone in the room stares at it in shock and turns to stone. So now all the bad guys are stone, and Dictys becomes king, and Danae becomes queen of this kingdom. And Perseus and his wife Andromeda are both of their parents are the ruling king and queen of a different kingdom. And everything would be happy, except that Perseus had a destiny. Perseus had a fate that had been foretold before his birth by the oracle at Delphi. And this came to pass, even though Perseus wasn't looking for it.
What was his destiny?
His destiny was the oracle at Delphi had told Danae's father, Acrisis, that if Danae ever had a son, that son would kill Acrisis. That's why he had, trying to avoid this, that's why he had put Danae and Perseus in the box and sent them away in the first place. So, Perseus, there's a couple different stories about how it happened, but somehow Perseus is engaging in some games. Either they were the Olympic Games, or it was another king was hosting these tournaments, but in any case, Perseus was competing in these sports games, and he was throwing a discus. It was like a heavy metal frisbee.
You don't know what a frisbee is.
Oh. It's like a plate, and you try and throw it as far as you can. Like, yeah. Only it's like made of rock or something. It's like heavy. And so he's throwing a discus like that, and the wind caught it in such a way that it's spinning, and it turned, it veered, and it hit King Acrisius and killed King Acrisius. So no matter what he did, King Acrisius was not able to escape the fate.
Does anybody ever escape fate and destiny when the oracle says it can happen?
Not usually. Usually when the oracle foretells something in Greek tradition, usually it happens. One theme in Greek stories is that the oracle tells something, and then the people try to change it or make sure it doesn't happen, and then those very things that they do to try to avoid their fate is what causes it to happen in the end. And it's sort of cyclical. Like, if they hadn't tried to avoid this, if they hadn't known something was coming, then it wouldn't have happened. That's a theme in Greek stories. So that's the story of Perseus. Perseus became one of the ancestors of Hercules and many other great heroes. Another story that is similar to the story of Perseus in theme, but not as happy, is the story of Oedipus. Oedipus is also someone who had the oracle at Delphi foretold a destiny, a fate about his life before he was even born, similar to Perseus. Oedipus was the son of Laius and Jocasta. Laius? Laius. And Queen Jocasta. Now, the king and the queen, before Oedipus was born, consulted the oracle, and the oracle said that if or when Queen Jocasta had a son, that son would kill his father. And I'm trying to remember if there was more to the prophecy than that.
And marry his mother.
Was that part of the prophecy, or did that just happen?
No, that was part of the prophecy.
Okay, so the prophecy was, if Queen Jocasta had a son, that son would kill his father and marry his mother. Now this was such a horrifying proposition that when Queen Jocasta did have a son, they decided to put the child out in the desert to die. And so they they bound his ankles. They tied his ankles together so that he couldn't crawl away, and put the baby out in the desert. And they sent a servant to do this. The servant took pity on the baby and gave the baby to a shepherd. And the shepherd couldn't afford to keep the baby, so the shepherd gave the baby to someone else, and the baby got passed around until he ended up in the court of a different king. The king Polybus, king of Corinth. Corinth, yeah. The city that Paul wrote to in the letters to the Corinthians. King Polybus, King Polybus raised Oedipus, which I believe means swelling, relating to how his ankles had been damaged and swollen by the bindings. So they raised Oedipus as a prince in their home. Never told him that he was adopted. Now, when he was an adult, Oedipus himself consulted the oracle at Delphi about his future, his destiny. And the oracle repeated to him that he was destined to kill his father.
And marry his mother.
And marry his mother. But the oracle did not tell him, Oedipus, that he was adopted. So Oedipus thought that the oracle was talking about King Polybus and his wife. So, to avoid killing King Polybus, Oedipus decided not to return home, but instead went journeying, seeking his fortune elsewhere. And as he was on the road, he encountered a charioteer, a chariot, like a carriage, and a charioteer, the man driving the carriage. And they were at a crossroads, and they got into a quarrel about a fight, a disagreement, about who would cross the road first. And it became a fight, and they started to fight each other. And this man, the charioteer, ended up getting killed. Oedipus killed him in self-defense in this fight. And Oedipus did not know that this was King Laus of Thebes, his biological father, his actual father. But Oedipus didn't know. So he continued journeying. Later, he was near Thebes, and he encountered the Sphinx. You may remember the Sphinx from the lesson on mythical beasts. Okay, so anyway, he encountered a Sphinx, which is a creature with the body of a lion and the head of a man, or a woman, of a person. And this Sphinx tells riddles. And if you remember, if you watched the lesson about beasts, you may remember the riddle. There are a couple different riddles that traditionally are attributed to the Sphinx, but the most famous one is, who goes about on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And when travelers would get this riddle wrong, when they didn't know the answer, the Sphinx would pounce on them and kill them. But Oedipus was very clever, and he answered correctly. Man crawls on 4 limbs as an infant, walks on 2 legs in the middle of his life, and walks with a cane, 3 legs, when he is old. That was the correct answer. Another riddle, just so you know, that's attributed to the Sphinx is, what 2 sisters give birth to each other? And the answer is day and night. 2 sisters that give birth to each other. Anyway, when the Sphinx realized that her riddle had been solved, she, for no good reason, kills herself and solves a problem that Thebes had had. Thebes, the Sphinx had been eating all of the travelers who were coming to Thebes. Oedipus just did Thebes a great service. And Thebes, the people brought him into Thebes and decided he should marry their queen, who had recently been widowed. The queen, Jocasta, Oedipus's mother. But Oedipus didn't know that it was his mother, and he did not know that the charioteer that he had killed was the late King Laus, his father. So, Oedipus marries Jocasta. They are very happy. They have many children who are also famous. One of these children is Antigone, who what's the playwright?
Sophocles.
Sophocles wrote a play called Antigone. It's the story of Antigone.
He also wrote
the play Oedipus Rex, which is the most famous version of this story, Oedipus. Though there are other ancient Greek stories which feature Oedipus and his story. Anyway, so Oedipus and Jocasta have children. They are happy, but for some reason, eventually, after a few years, a plague of infertility comes to Thebes. Women do not get pregnant, animals do not get pregnant, and the crops do not grow. So this is a big problem. And Oedipus sends a messenger to the oracle at Delphi to find out what they need to do. And the oracle responds, find the man who killed the late King Laus and send him into exile. And then everything will be as it should be. So Oedipus starts looking for who killed Laus. And the oracle also said, find the blind prophet. Let me see, what's the name of the blind prophet? I don't know what the name of the blind prophet is, but the oracle at Delphi suggested that they identify this specific prophet and enlist his help. So they start looking for the man who killed Laus, and they find the prophet and ask him. And the blind prophet recommends that Oedipus call off the search and just not even attempt it. Not even attempt to find out what was going on.
Blind prophet knew what the answer was?
Yes, the blind prophet knew what was going on.
And thought it would be just too upsetting.
Yeah, and he gave his best recommendation to Oedipus was that Oedipus just leave it alone. Yes. Let everybody die.
Better to go through a genocide, no more people.
Yeah.
No
more
animals.
Thebes. But Oedipus pushes him for the real answer, and eventually the blind prophet tells Oedipus the truth, that the charioteer that he killed was King Laus. And not only that, but that it was his father, and that Jocasta is his mother, and all that. Now Oedipus does not believe him, because he is the son of King Polydectes. Now he knows he had this destiny to kill his father and marry his mother, but this wasn't his father and his mother, as far as he was concerned. So he sent, and also not only that, King Polydectes had died. And so he thought that he was free of that destiny, because he had not killed King Polydectes. And so he sent a messenger to his mother, his supposed mother, to ask confirmation of whether or not he was their child. And the queen thought that perhaps Oedipus was feeling guilty for his father's death, for King Polydectes' death. Oh, I'm so sorry, it's not Polydectes. Polydectes is the king from Perseus. Polybus. Okay, so King Polybus was the one who adopted Oedipus. And King Polybus had died while Oedipus was gone, living in Thebes. And the queen thought that maybe Oedipus was feeling responsible for the death of King Polybus. And so the queen responded, "Don't worry about it, Oedipus. You're not even King Polybus' real son. You were adopted, so don't feel responsible." And that was Oedipus' last hope. And he went and he did some research and found out about how Jocasta had given up her son as a baby to die, and to this certain shepherd. And Oedipus tracks down the shepherd, and the shepherd says, yes, he took the baby to the court of King Polybus.
So it's proven.
So it is all clear that Oedipus really is the lost son of Queen Jocasta, and that he was the one who killed his father, King Laus. And at that point, Queen Jocasta goes and hangs herself out of grief and shock and Oedipus goes to find her, his mother and his wife, his mother and the mother of his children. And he finds her dead, hanging in their room, and he takes some pins out of her dress and he puts his own eyes out in grief and in self-hatred, and he sends himself into exile, wandering blindly, and the land is healed, and the famine, the plague of infertility lifts.
Do you see a symbolic something with the making himself blind? It seems like I heard somewhere that it was because he had been so blind as to do what, he had been so blind all his life, he
Yeah,
put his eyes out.
that sounds very reasonable. Yeah. And Antigone, his daughter, is his guide after that. She guides him along, and one of his sons, by Queen Jocasta, becomes king. He had 2 sons, but it's very tragic. Even after that, the kingdom never goes back to having a happy, peaceful time. There is warring among the family members, and I think the brothers fight. One brother kills the other brother, and then Antigone tries to bury her brother, and so her other brother has her buried with him. She's alive, he's dead. He buries them together like in a cave or something.
Buries her alive?
Mm-hmm.
Does she die?
Yeah.
Wow, he sounds
It's very
terrible.
tragic.
He kills his brother and his sister.
I believe so. I didn't
Wow.
do research on that one right now, but I saw the play at one point. That's my memory. My friend went to a classical school, and they put on Antigone by Sophocles, and she was Antigone. This is Julia Criz.
Julia, yeah.
Yeah. I remember being very shocked when I saw the play. I didn't realize. I thought there was no good reason to have such a sad story, when an author could just as easily have made it turn out well, But anyway,
It's a tragedy.
it's a tragedy, but why? Why have tragedies? Comedy.
Comedy.
Tragedy, what is the saying? Tragedy is when good people are brought down by human error or something, whereas comedy is when bad people prosper because of divine grace, something like that. Anyway, so those are the stories of Perseus and Oedipus. They both had, they both were destined to kill their fathers by as foretold by the oracle at Delphi. And their fathers, well, Perseus' grandfather and Oedipus' father, both tried to resist that destiny by getting rid of the child. And the child grew up without knowing this destiny and still fulfilled it, even though they had no desire to kill their fathers. This is an example of the Greek sense of irony and fate. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back for more later.